Yesterday, Israel committed what I would consider a terror attack in Lebanon. The story is quite something. 9 people, including a child, have been killed after handheld pagers used by members of the armed group Hezbollah to communicate exploded across Lebanon, the country's health minister says. Iran's ambassador to Lebanon was among 2,800 other people who were wounded by the simultaneous blast in Beirut and several other regions. The unprecedented mass explosion of handheld pagers used by Hezbollah fighters came after the military group switched from mobile phones as a means of communication to reduce the risk of being tracked by Israel. The pages that blew up were apparently acquired by Hezbollah after the group's leader ordered members in February to stop using cell phones, warning they could be tracked by Israeli intelligence. A Hezbollah official told the Associated Press the pages were a new brand, but declined to say how long they had been in use. Taiwanese company Gold Apollo said Wednesday that it authorized its brands on the AR-924 pages used by the Hezbollah militant group, but the devices were produced and sold by a company called BAC. At about 3:30 p.m. local time on Tuesday, as people shopped for groceries, sat in cafes, or drove cars and motorcycles in the afternoon, the pages in hands or pockets started heating up and then exploded, leaving blood-splattered scenes and panicking bystanders. Now, today, another similar attack happened, this time with walkie-talkies. 9 people have been killed and more than 300 injured after walkie-talkies used by Lebanon's armed group Hezbollah detonated across the country's south and the southern suburbs of the capital, Beirut, the Lebanese health minister said. At least one of the blasts took place near a funeral organised by Iran-backed Hezbollah for those killed by the previous day, when thousands of pages used by the group exploded across the country. The handheld radios were purchased by Hezbollah 5 months ago, around the same time that the pages were bought, said a security source. Now, there were many on Twitter celebrating this attack and the one yesterday as to ignore the blatant indiscriminate bombing and violation of international law. Zionist Senator John Fetterman tweeted this: "I fully support efforts to target and neutralize any existential threats like Hezbollah." Nio Berg, who has 130,000 followers, tweeted this: Mass circumcision event brought to you by Motorola, then added a picture of a pager. Actor Michael Rappaport, who is an extremely outspoken Zionist, who, if you ask me, is completely deranged, posted this video.
Beep, beep. Beep, beep. Beep, beep.
I mean, someone who is definitely mentally stable. He's clearly trying to go for the Joker part. I'm sorry, you're never going to be Joaquin Phoenix. You're not going to be Heath Ledger. You ain't getting the part. Now, some of you may be asking, why would anyone care? It's Hezbollah. Well, the issue here is that these buildings took place in public, in the middle of the street, anywhere. We actually have video footage of one going off in a supermarket with children present. So, yeah, you can see in the footage there were 2 children in the supermarket, but people making jokes online. Now, anyone can get their hands on pages. I mean, Israel can't differentiate between civilians and targets, not that they ever cared. Now, there's a real fear of pages being loaded with explosives all around the world. I mean, staff in our NHS use them. How do we know they aren't rigged? Now, I'm not suggesting that it's done on purpose and NHS workers are targets. But what I am saying is this sets a dangerous precedent, and it's not out of the question that some could accidentally end up in places where they are not intended to be. There's also this post. Breaking. More than 2 weeks ago, on August 29th, employees of the American University Medical Center in Beirut received this email saying their old pages will be replaced. There was an explosive inside them, apparently according to the tweeter. Now, the image attached to it reads this. Dear AUBMC community, as we upgrade our paging system to a new, updated version with better coverage, we are officially decommissioning the old paging system. The go-live date is August 29th at 8:30 a.m. The new paging system will be restricted to emergency code teams, ensuring improved reliability and focused communication during critical situations. Please note that the code activation process will remain centralized in the call center. As communicated previously, WebEx will replace old personal pages as the messaging tool for regular communication. For users who are currently on a code team, please keep your personal pages with you. We will switch these with new pages on the go live data. For users not on the code team, please return your personal pages to the IT service desk located on the second floor of the MAB building. This will help us ensure a smooth transition. Attached is a detailed guide on how to install and configure WebEx on your computers or mobile devices for messaging only. Now, I want to stress, this is pure speculation. This post could be coincidental. I really want to make that clear because I'm not a big fan of conspiracy theories. I mean, we'll leave that to the right-wingers. But my point is, what Israel did, it is forcing us to ask these types of questions. Now, Kevin, I've bombarded you with a lot of information there, but this is a huge story and it's important we get all the context to this. I want your response. And would you agree with me that this is a terror attack?
I think there's no doubt that this is a terrorist attack, yes. It would be described as such in any other instance. I mean, if you imagine an instance where this were reversed, if it were Hezbollah or indeed Hamas targeting members of the Israeli government or the IDF, this would be described as terrorism, which does lead to the inevitable conclusion that terrorism now, according to the West, is just stuff that's done by enemies of the West or people who don't align themselves with Western foreign policy goals, which rather makes a mockery of the concept of terrorism or that ever realistically describe anything as terrorism, because it's obviously been used as a partisan smear rather than anything else. Firstly, Hezbollah has two strains to it. It's often described as a terrorist organization, and it certainly has an armed wing to it. It's also a political party, which is a part of the governing coalition of the internationally recognized government of Lebanon. That's a thing that has to be said. So if you're targeting not just military personnel, but specifically politicians, that is a war crime. That is absolutely a war crime, and you're doing terrorism involved within it as well. The fact that this is also extrajudicial killing, no one has been convicted of anything, and yet people are being indiscriminately murdered by the Israeli state in public, including, like you say, I think there's 2 children of the 9 that have been killed, and thousands injured. Entire hospitals are now overrun with the injured. One of the people being buried was then their funeral was then the target of an attack the next day. Compound terrorism, if you will. The Israeli state, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest, is committing war crimes. It's just so brazen with it because it gets support from people like John Fetterman and to a lesser extent Michael Rappaport, who, I mean, you claim is nothing like Heath Ledger, but if he wants to follow Heath Ledger, go for it, champ. In Minecraft, of course. They are given cover by Western governments to be able to just target indiscriminately political targets, but also just civilians, because this is so haphazard with the way this was going to work. There's no anyone describing this as targeted is a hack, and you can just dismiss their opinions ever again because they're full of shit. This was the least targeted targeting I've ever seen. You've got people, like you say, at the hospital there, who found explosives in pages that were going to be used by nurses and doctors. I'm sorry, are they also Hezbollah now? Like, I know Israel has a loose definition of what it considers to be an enemy combatant, but I don't know that doctors and nurses under any circumstances really would be considered that. They are killing children. Anyone trying to defend this is garbage.
I mean, I wrote on social media last night, I think if anyone's pro-Israel today, you're too far gone. You know, I was having a discussion with one of the Turn Left contributors, and they were saying, I cannot believe people are defending this. And I'm saying, I can, though, because we're at the point now where there's no logic, there's no reasoning. It is pure Zionist ideology. Now, look, I mean, when October 7th happened, you know, us political nerds, you know, we already kind of had a side. We already support the Palestinians. But for those that aren't that politically tuned in, it was understandable that you had a sizable, even maybe a majority of people who went, oh, Israel, of course, has a right to defend itself because obviously we just seen a terrorist attack. But it didn't take long, maybe a few weeks, people started to wake up to the fact that, hold on a second, what Israel was doing in response is kind of kind of heavy-handed. And now what they're doing is crazy. Most of the reasonable people have already denounced Israel, have already said, I'm not supporting them. So the hangers-on are those who cannot be reasoned with, and they are motivated by hate. I mean, that video of Michael Rappaport, the laughter in that, right? That
Yeah.
was him laughing at indiscriminate bombing. That was him laughing at 2 dead children, right? Those who are making jokes about, oh, whoa, the fighters haven't got balls anymore. You do realize that, yes, as you pointed out, health workers could be using them, which are potentially killing them or injuring them. Even if someone drops their pager, let's say a Hezbollah fighter drops their pager and an innocent bystander just picked up and went, oh, what's this? And it blows up. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work out how indiscriminate this is. So I do not buy the fact that anyone who's supporting this are just ignorant and actually they think, oh, it's safe, it's definitely targeted. No, you ain't that stupid. If you're seeing footage of it going off in a supermarket, if you're just the fact that a pager is being used as a weapon, a concealed weapon, you know that can get into the hands of anyone. So anyone who defends this, I'm sorry, they are motivated by hate. It's motivated by hate of Palestinians, of Muslims, of brown people. And I think that's what it is. And it ties it back to the JC, right? Many people who work for the Jewish Chronicle are extremely Islamophobic. So you cannot convince anyone, can you? They are too far gone, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing that would convince these people otherwise. If there was another attack by Israel tomorrow and it killed 500,000 people, Michael Rappaport will still film himself laughing. You'll still get the Zionists saying, oh, well, this is smart by the IDF. You'll still get apologists for it because it doesn't end until every single Palestinian is dead and every single opposition to Israel, because it's now bleeding into Lebanon, it's bleeding into Syria. I mean, I've had a bit of a rant there, but I want to get your take on how this is going into World War III territory now.
Yeah, no, you were cooking. I didn't want to interrupt. Yeah, no, you're quite right. This can be seen, I think, as an escalation by a very desperate Benjamin Netanyahu who needs to externalize his internal problem. The war in Gaza has ceased to be the distraction that he needs it to be in order to stay in power and avoid the corruption charges that await him and the inevitable prison sentence from that. He needs the war to never stop. He needs the war to be continuous. In a very genuinely Orwellian sense, the war must be continual, perpetual, for as long as he's able to continue it to be so. And so if he can stoke a foreign war, well, I mean, technically, I suppose he's already in a foreign war, but a foreign war by international standards as well, the likes of America will rally around them, because that's what happens, unfortunately, because the American state is bought and paid for in that respect. It's really, really fucking gross. Yeah, he's going to try and stoke this. He's going to try and stoke a war outside of Israel's borders if he absolutely can. But I think there's a bigger issue as well with this problem, which could, if we broaden it out for a second, the technological targeting of people by state actors for this kind of brutal, indiscriminate punishment. Or even discriminate punishment, because of course one of the reasons they introduced these pages were because they were worried that they were being tracked by Israel through smartphone communication. But of course, most people do use smartphones, or even if it is a pager or whatever. The idea that a government can now target and murder people with the flick of a switch in this way holds genuinely, again, Orwellian technocratic implications for the way in which technological targeting can be used in the future, and something that we should be genuinely worried about and look to international law to hopefully try and curtail. Although, given that they're not even curtailing the murder, why they would do so for technology, I'm not entirely sure. But something needs to be done about it because it's dystopian as fuck.
Yes, and first of all, I mean, Netanyahu needs to be stopped because he's a complete maniac.
Yes.
We'll add that in there.
100%.
But it's, I mean, even though I think this is incredibly, incredibly unlikely, this has made me imagine a scenario where what if the UK were to stand up to Israel and they targeted people with pages in this country? Now, again, I don't think that's likely, but what they did in Lebanon, I think starts that precedent, and it does create this extremely utopian society where Israel can just flick a button and in a foreign country can just blow people up. Again, I don't think that will happen. I don't want to try and instill fear on people, but I think what Israel did is doing the fear here. I don't think I'm driving any fear. I think their acts is making people worried. I mean, people
exactly.
if they've got pages on, then they're going to think, fuck. And that just and it might not be Israel. Like in the future, it could be another country that does it. But what that does is sets a precedent. So Israel does it to Lebanon. What stops America doing it to another country, or Russia doing it to us? Whatever it is. I mean, this always has, you know, an escalation effect to it all.
Well, exactly, yeah. Because if this now turns around, if they do a similar thing to Israel, Israel can't really complain. Not on a moral level. Legally, they can, because it would still be a crime, in as much as Israel doing it first is a crime. But if someone were to do this now to members of the IDF, Israel couldn't morally turn around and complain about this, because they started this shit. Of course they will. The cry bully always does. They both bully and then cry when they get a taste of their own medicine, of course.
That's how bullies work.
Yeah. But it's not. It's the terrorists doing the instilling of fear. Pointing out the terrorists is not the instilling of the fear. It's the terrorists that are doing it. And I think you're right to point it out. And I think the terrorists are wrong for doing it in the first place. And it should be pointed out, because unfortunately the media is letting us down enormously by. I mean, even in the article you gave, and it was a good article, it's perfectly fine, but they kept using phrases like armed militants or backed by Iran. We never say the IDF or the American-backed IDF. That's just fine. Because they're the kind of terrorists that we support, so that's fine.
Even the passive language on what happened, you know, explosives detonated in supermarket. And to go back to what you said earlier, I think if we want to test, I mean, we could play a game here. How do we test if this is terrorism or not? Well, let's apply the same action to someone we don't like, and we would say that's terrorists. If we say, oh, Muslim terrorists attack supermarket or Aldi in London, right? What would they say? They say it's terrorists. But the media doesn't want to do that to Israel because they're too fucking scared. They're too scared to go against the grain.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.